Marc Short, former White House legislative director and former chief of staff to Vice President Mike Pence, joins us now. I'm curious, Marc, from your perspective, how different the policies of Trump 2.0 are than the policies of Trump 1.0, which you were intimately involved with.
Well, thanks, Lisa, for having me. I think that the Trump 2.0 policies are dramatically different. I think that the president has basically eschewed most of the conservatives who were around him in the first administration, and it's a far more populist agenda this time, particularly as it comes to trade. I think in the first administration, sure, there were limited tariffs on steel and aluminum, but predominantly it was rallying the globe against China and isolating China with tariffs. What you saw out of the gate with this administration was across-the-board tariffs, which the court, obviously repudiated this week. But it goes back to this notion that you even saw with Peter articulating, which is one that you want to try to build a moat around the United States and basically assess tariffs not just for national security reasons against China, but claiming because of trade deficits or claiming because of currency imbalances. I mean, today America exports more than ever before, but that's not a message you hear from the administration. What you hear them saying is that we're going to assess tariffs to try to get manufacturing jobs back into America.
But don't you think the administration is taking this aggressive approach so Trump himself has leverage at the table?
I think that this is one of the few positions that the president has consistently had throughout. I think there's been a lot of other positions he's showed a willingness to negotiate on. But when it comes to trade, it is his core belief. And I think that you're going to continue to see him, as you said, dial it up and dial it back. And I think he wants that tool in his hands and not something that the Constitution says belongs to Congress as the ability to assess taxes. And so, yes, I think there's been no president in American history that's ever tried to use IEEPA for the notion of using broad-based tariffs. But I think you'll continue to see the administration say, okay, well, then we'll do it under 232 or do it under 301. Until the courts relent on those two, they're going to continue to try to push it at every angle they can.
Do you view all these trade talks and negotiations really about trade, or is it also about more investment? The president just went to the Middle East. He inked all these deals. He wants to see companies invest in America. And we see a number of companies try to basically cozy up to the United States, and countries talking about how much they're willing to build in the U.S.
I mean, I think it's both, and I think that the president deserves credit for some of those deals. But I think in many cases, those are probably deals that were already in the works, that those countries know if they can give president credit for that, then perhaps he'll give them more relief on tariffs. So I think it's twofold. In some cases, I think it's other nations announcing some sort of vague investment deal in the United States, believing that will give the administration a little more flexibility in what they assess as far as tariffs.
You were the legislative director under Trump's first administration. For those that are not used to Washington speak, you basically shepherded through the first Trump tax plan, TCJA, and we're going to see the extension of that potentially. What are you expecting the Senate to change in this bill sent over by the House?
I think you'll see a little bit of changes, but I don't think it's going to be significant, Marie. I think the reality is that the vote in the House of 215 to 214, it doesn't have a lot of margin to change this bill significantly. I think there's some senators who want to see more cuts. I think they're going to see other senators who don't want to see as many cuts in things like the Biden IRA bill. And so I think you'll see some negotiation, but at the end of the day, I suspect that what ultimately comes out is pretty similar to what the House passed.
How serious do you think this administration is about, I don't want to say the Mar-a-Lago Accord, but some of the provisions in that? And I'm talking in particular in the legislation. There is one section that's getting a lot of attention in bond markets in particular. It's Section 899, which would tax certain investments in the United States from foreign investors tied to particular countries that have VAT taxes, that tax some of the technology coming from the U.S. What do you make of that?
I think it's one of the things you will see probably change in the Senate. I think that there's a lot of, I think, tax gimmicks that were candidly in the first bill here that they advanced to the House that the president articulated, like the no tax on tips. And again, I'm not sure how many people who get their income predominantly on tips actually pay taxes. I think when you look at some of the things like reducing deduction or adding a deduction for automobiles made in America, there's a lot of these kind of gimmicky initiatives to advance a broader narrative that the president wants. But I don't think that you'll probably see those survive the Senate.
You know how the sausage is made, and you talked about how when you were there, it was much more of a conservative fiscal approach. You said this is much more populist. And I wonder about that battle on Capitol Hill right now with Republicans who are more traditionally conservative and those who are more populist, and then how much that battle is being quieted by the overlay of allegiance to Trump. What do you make of that?
Well, an example was last night, the president's tweet against Leonard Leo. I mean, Leonard was one of the founders of Federalist Society that I think wasn't just one of the biggest contributors to the president's advancement of conservative judges. It actually, if you remember in 2016, the president came forward and said, here's my list of 21 potential nominees to the Supreme Court. That was formulated by the Federalist Society. Much of what the president's accomplishment on the judicial front was because of Leonard and the Federalist Society. And so it's just the latest iteration of him moving away from conservatives and advancing a more strictly populist approach. When it comes to the Senate and Congress, I think the reality is there are more conservatives, but they're reluctant to speak out because they know the president has such dominant control over our party right now. They don't want to get primaried. And so even though in private they may express traditionally conservative viewpoints, they advocate publicly in an allegiance with the president's populist agenda.
Marc Short, really wonderful to have you. Thank you so much for being with us. Marc Short, the former chief of staff to Vice President Mike Pence.